Hey guys, welcome back to our home safari here at Cincinnati Zoo. And today we are bringing you one of my favorite sea creatures, the mysterious mermaid. There is one right there. And that is our best joke for this April Fools. These guys obviously aren't mermaids. We have our manatees here with you today. So I'm going to introduce you guys to our two boy manatees and tell you a little bit about them. Now, one thing with manatees is they were mistaken for mermaids. Back when explorers first came to the Caribbean, they saw these guys out in the ocean and they mistakenly thought that they were mermaids. But if you look at them, obviously they're not nearly as maybe graceful as mermaids have been portrayed in cartoons, but I think they're just as every bit as beautiful as mermaids are. So the one right here, this is Truffle Shuffle. He is our newest resident manatee. He came to us a few months ago and he was rescued from the wild. He was around 200 pounds and he was in water that was too cold. So manatees look like they have some blubber on them. They look a little fat, but they actually don't have a lot of that insulation that other marine mammals have. So they can get into water that's too cold. Anything below 68 degrees will actually make them very, very sick. And at 200 pounds, he was also pretty small to be away from his mom. So he had to be rescued. He was taken to SeaWorld's critical care facility in Orlando, Florida, and came here to be a companion for Pippin, who is the guy closest to us. Now, if you've been following the zoo's manatee program or have come to the zoo in the past few years, you'll know Pippin. He's been here for a couple of years now, about 2.5 years, and he was rescued when he was a very small baby. So he was around 58 pounds when he was found out in the wild, which means he was very, very young. So manatees as babies are about 40 to 60 pounds when they're first born. So that meant he was a really small baby and he had to be rescued, obviously. Manatees are mammals, which means they drink milk from their moms as babies. So he was bottle fed at SeaWorld Orlando. When he was about a year old, he came here with two other boy manatees named Matthew and Miles. And Matthew and Miles, they grew to a size where they could be returned to the wild. And don't tell Pippin I said this, but he's just a little guy. He has not grown as quickly as manatees generally do, but he's nice and healthy, so there's nothing wrong with him. He's just small, which meant he needed another year in human care to reach 600 pounds. So for these guys, they're gonna stay with us until they're big enough to go back out into the wild, which is at 600-pound mark. Both of these guys are about 500 pounds right now, so they've got a little bit more growing to do, and they will stay here probably until about October. That's usually when we send manatees back down to Florida. Once they get sent to Florida, they'll spend a few months probably at SeaWorld again, where they can get acclimated to different circumstances. They'll be fed some natural vegetation. Truffle Shuffle's giving you a really nice up-close view right there. And it looks like Pippin's gonna do it as well. So these guys will eat some natural vegetation down there. They'll learn how to wear their tracking device, so they're gonna get a belt put around the skinny portion of their tail. And then they'll usually get put back out into the wild around February or March. So that's a really good time for manatees to be returned to the wild so that they can get used to living in the warm water sites where they're gonna be returned. Now, as I said, these guys have a little bit more growing to do. Manatees are really unique animals and they get big and strong just by eating plants. So these guys are the only marine mammals that are vegetarians. Every other marine mammal, whether it's a polar bear, a whale, a dolphin, all of those guys eat meat. But these guys grow big and strong just eating plants. And here at the zoo, they eat lettuce. So between the two of these guys, they're eating about 100 pounds of lettuce every single day. There's a little bit floating up at the top right now. And that's a big deal for these guys. These guys are actually the most expensive animal in the zoo to feed because they eat a huge amount of those high quality greens. And I'm going to take some questions from you guys. So if you have questions and you're putting them out there, I'm going to try to get to as many as I can today. Now, Andy wants to know, can they make noise? They do make noise, and that's one of the really important things with these guys, is they live in water that a lot of times is pretty murky. They don't have great eyesight. So moms and babies communicate by making high-pitched squeaks. So they'll make little squeaks back and forth to let each other know that they're doing all right and where they are. So they do make noise. It's just a tiny little high-pitched squeak. If you're ever at the zoo and it's fairly quiet out in our lobby, you sometimes can hear them through the glass. Alex wants to know, what is their favorite food? So these guys, Pippin and Truffle Shuffle right now, both really like kale. So kale had its big fad moment a few years ago. It's super healthy for them, and that's their favorite. And we'll actually put it into feeders that look like logs so we can sink it to the bottom. Manatees in the wild, they'll eat from the top and the bottom, and we want to mimic that as much as possible since they're going back out in the wild. So we'll put kale down in the feeder so they can forage along the bottom and eat that favorite snack of theirs. So we were asked, who is their closest living relative? And this is one of the things that I love most about these guys because they're super unique. A lot of people would think it's a walrus because the way they look, but their closest living relative is actually the elephant. So these guys are sometimes called sea cows, but really they're more like an underwater elephant. And if you look, their lips, where you can kind of see it on Truffle Shuffle right now, their lips are kind of like a very short trunk. A trunk on an elephant is its upper lip and nose combined. These guys kind of have that, but it's way shorter since they live underwater, but they can actually grab things just like an elephant can with their trunk. They grab it with their lips. He's giving us a nice yawn too. And you may be able to see it on their flippers. They have toenails, a lot like an elephant, and then they have the same sort of teeth as an elephant. So elephants and manatees replace their teeth throughout their lifetime, and they just have molars, so just the back grinding teeth. Like elephants, these guys eat a lot of plants, and their teeth can wear out pretty quickly. So these guys are constantly replacing their teeth, so they never have to worry about going to the dentist or getting a cavity drilled, because there's always a new one coming in back. So George asked, who is their favorite keeper? And I see this on a lot of our home safaris. And with these guys, we manage them a little bit differently than those other animals. So most of the zoo animals form really close relationships with their keepers. But with us, we try to manage these guys as hands-off as possible. So I can say that they probably don't have a favorite keeper because we don't try to form those relationships with them. We don't want them relying on us for food. We want them to be really strong, independent animals so that they can be successful when they go back out into the wild. Olivia asked, are they endangered? So manatees are kind of a really great conservation success story. These guys are no longer considered endangered. A few years ago, they were taken off that list, and now they're just considered threatened. And part of that is because there were so many protections put in place. Now, these guys don't have any natural predators, so sharks and alligators are going to leave them alone. Unfortunately, their biggest threat is people. So back in the 1970s, these guys weren't doing very well out in the wild. They were getting hit by boats and tangled in fishing line and things like that. But a lot of protections got put in place, and now we can say that there are around probably 8,000 Florida manatees left in the wild. So they are no longer endangered. And part of the thing that has helped their populations are programs like this one, where we work with other zoos and aquariums to rescue manatees that are either sick, orphaned, or injured. We keep them until they're big enough or well enough to go back out into the wild, and we return them to the wild to help that population. So it's partially the protections that were put in place and programs like this that helped these guys out. So Selena wants to know how long they can stay underwater. So that's a great question. These guys, when they're underwater, like Pippin right now, he's holding his breath. But they are very good, they're very adapted to holding their breath and living underwater. If they are sound asleep as a grown-up, they can stay under for about 20 minutes at a time, which is a very long time to hold your breath. Usually these guys, when they're swimming around and being active like they are right now, will take a breath maybe every 3 minutes. And it's a very quick little thing. They'll go up, they'll open their nostrils, take a nice big breath, and then go back down. Charlie asked, how big can they get? So Pippin and Truffle Shuffle, being boys, they're not going to get as big as the ladies. One of the things that makes these guys unique is the girls get bigger than the boys. So boy manatees typically are around 12 to 1,600 pounds, maybe 10 feet long. Female manatees get to be about 2,000 to 3,000 pounds sometimes. The biggest one on record was over 3,500 pounds and almost 15 feet long. So the moral of the story is don't mess with Mama Manatee because she's way, way bigger. So Zach asked, do they eat fish? And for these guys, no, they don't. The fish in the tank with these guys are friends, not food. So these fish help mimic a natural habitat for them, but they just eat veggies, just eat their greens and some veggies that we throw in there as well. Are there different species of manatees? Yes, so these guys are the Florida manatee, which is a subspecies of the West Indian manatee. So there's another manatee called the Caribbean manatee, which is the one that the early explorers mistook for mermaids. And it looks almost identical to these guys, and those are both the West Indian manatee. Then there is one that lives in Africa called the West African manatee. There's a smaller one that's kind of dark and has some cow spots on it. They are the Amazonian manatees, and they just live in the Amazon River. And then these guys have a cousin called the Dugong. And the Dugong's a little bit different. It lives just in salt water, and instead of a round tail like these guys, it has a tail more shaped like a whale or a dolphin, so a triangular tail, and that helps it be more adapted to living in the ocean. Andy wants to know, what do they feel like? So these guys have a little bit more texture to their skin than a dolphin would. So if you've ever gotten to touch a dolphin, dolphins are super smooth. These guys feel a little bit more like an underwater football. So they've got a little bit of texture to their skin, and it's a little bit hard to see right now, but they actually also have hair. So they have little hairs about every inch. And those hairs are all connected to nerves, so they all kind of act like your cat's whiskers would act. So they can sense the water moving around them. They can sense each other touching them just by those little hairs all along their body. Haley wants to know, how do we transport them to Florida? So very carefully. So we partner with DHL. And DHL helps fly cargo around the US, around the world, and they actually fly on a cargo plane. A lot of people wonder if they are in water when we fly them, and they are not. They will go in big padded boxes, and we always have a vet and a care team member go with them to make sure they're okay during the flight, but that way they can be out of water for the shortest amount of time possible. So they do go on a plane, just like you and I, except they probably don't have to wait as long as at the airport as we do. So we'll ship them down just flying in a cargo plane. Olivia wants to know, how long do the babies stay with their moms? So the babies will stay with their mom for 1 to 3 years. And that's something that we can use to know whether or not the manatees in the wild are orphaned. If they're around 200 pounds like Truffle Shuffle was when he was found, we know that he was probably about a year old. He was probably still too young to be away from his mom. So really it could be as little as a year, but generally those babies are going to stay for 2 or 3 years with their moms. Isabella wants to know, are they nocturnal? Not really. These guys will sleep throughout the day. They can be up at night, but most of the time they are up during the day and sleeping a bit at night. But like a lot of marine mammals that live just in the water, they don't have the same sleep structure as us because they have to get up to go get a breath every so often. So they might take shorter naps throughout the day, but they actually will sleep about a total of 8 to 10 hours a day still. So Quinn wants to know, why are they called mermaids, or why were they mistaken for mermaids? We get asked this a lot. I like to say that there was probably a lot of rum and they were at sea for a very long time, the sailors were, so when they saw these guys they thought that must be a mermaid. But really we don't know why they thought these guys were mermaids. The face looks a little human-like if you use your imagination. It's a little bit more human-like than a whale or a dolphin, so that's probably why they mistook these guys for mermaids. All right, so thank you guys for coming stopping by the home safari today. As always, thanks for joining us with this. We hope you learned a little bit. And if you have time or can donate to our home safari, that would be awesome. All of that is helping us keep the zoo animals fed and happy and healthy during this time that we're closed down. And we're happy that we could teach you a little bit about our manatees today, and come back tomorrow. Check out what we've got for you tomorrow at 3 o'clock.